And so what happens is Congress, for the first time, declares war and declares war on Spain. All right. Now, we have to ask ourselves a question. What are we going to do with Cuba once Spain is gone? Right? I mean, are we going to take over Cuba? Or is Cuba going to become American colony? You know? And what we say is that, no, it's not. Right? And this is called the Teller Amendment. This is where we promise, the U.S. promises, not to annex Cuba. All right, so we're not interested in taking over it and making it a colony. We just, for whatever purposes, we just want to be, we want us to be seen as good guys. We don't want to be, these nasty colonists. We just want freedom for Cuba, right? Cuba Libre, right? We want Cuba to be free like America is free. At least that's what the everyday person is thinking. All right. So when we go to war with Spain, the average American's behind this, and so there's a big response from ordinary Americans to go to war. So you had at this time 200,000 men enlist in the army to go and fight. All right. All right. Let's back a little bit. So here's the thing. The Spanish-American War is not just in Cuba, though. All right? Spain also has other places it controls. And you need to understand this, right? This is very important. So while Cuba puts us into war with Spain, Cuba is not the only place that's at stake in this fight, right? The Philippines are another place. It's another Spanish colony. Right? It's why there's a lot of Catholics in the Philippines. It was a Spanish colony. There's a lot of Catholics in the Philippines because of that influence. All right? So not only do we have to fight, we're fighting a multiple front war. All right? So here we're fighting, here's Cuba over here, down here. And then we're also fighting over here in the Pacific. So we're fighting in two different oceans. We're fighting in the Atlantic Ocean and the Pacific Ocean. All right? So what is the war in the Philippines like? We'll get back to the war in Cuba in just a moment, but let's look for a second at the Philippines and what's happening there. All right. So to fight in the Philippines, one of the major battles in those islands is we attack on a bay called Manila Bay in the Philippines. And we overwhelmed the Spanish. We beat them by a long shot. Right? We beat them very badly. 400 Spanish die in this battle. 1 American dies, and that's not even from the battle. It's actually from heat stroke. There's a officer named George Dewey who goes in and fights, and our fleet of battleships, right, our very strong navy, just totally demolishes the Spanish forces there. All right. So at the same time, just like there were Cubans who wanted to revolt against the Spanish, there's Filipinos who want also to be free, just like the Cubans wanted to be free. And so there are Filipino nationalists who side with us and help us to fight and overcome those people in the Spanish in the Philippines, right? Another country that Spain is in control of, that we take over as well, is Guam. All right, Guam, it doesn't take much for us to get that island. It doesn't have much resistance. All right, so here, let's back up a little bit now. So Philippines, Guam, Cuba. Those are the 3 countries that we've been fighting in. Right? There's one more we're going to talk about in a minute. It's Puerto Rico. We will acquire these islands. They will become, kind of like American colonies. Philippines will actually become an American colony, but, however, not for the long run. We promise that eventually we will grant the Philippines their independence. And we do. Right? We take over for a short period of time to make it a smooth transition from Spanish rule to native rule. All right, because here's the thing, right? If we set the Philippines free, this is the way that the people are thinking. If we set the Philippines free from Spanish rule, there are the English, there are the Germans, the French, and they could easily come in and take over the Philippines, right? If we don't stay there and protect them, this is what they're thinking. If we don't stay there and protect them, then these other countries can come in and take it over, right? So also we do want to open up the place to missionaries, Christian missionaries, even though the Catholicism is there. We want to spread the Protestant faith. Of course, we do want to have some of the resources there. We do want to open up markets. So we do have some skin in the game. It will be helpful for us as America to be able to open up shop there. So there are lots of different reasons why we want to stay in the Philippines, but we justify it by saying we don't want to let other countries take them over, and we want to make sure they stay independent, at least for a little while, or at least we want to take over for a little while so that when the time comes, we can set them free and they can be their own country. All right, now back to Cuba. All right, we defeat the Spanish in Cuba. All right, and we capture the Guantanamo Bay, which we'll talk more about Guantanamo Bay because Guantanamo Bay is a big issue still today, where we keep prisoners of war, where we keep Al-Qaeda terrorists and people like that. This will happen in the future. All right, so how does it happen? How does the war play out in Cuba? All right, well, we have run into some issues initially because our troops don't have a lot of supplies. They're badly trained. All right, so one issue that these troops run into is that the stuff they're eating is nasty. Right? Remember how we talked about up in Sinclair in the jungle and the nasty meat in the meat factories? Well, they eat that meat and they get sick. They get really sick. All right. So early on, we see there's some problems with the meatpacking industry because how badly it's affecting our troops there. All right. So what happens? Right. The troops aren't doing so well because they're badly supplied and trained. So then a group of guys known as the Rough Riders, all right. Basically a group of different kinds of people, very diverse group, mostly like rough Westerners, even ex-convicts, and even some upper-class Easterners, like some Yale rough guys, if you can imagine that, are being led by none other than Theodore Roosevelt. Now, this is before Theodore Roosevelt was president, right? He was a war hero. Before he was president, he led the Rough Riders into battle in Cuba. And they also get help from African American soldiers. All right, and so with their help, they eventually overcome the Spanish in Cuba. And in the process of this happening, almost 3,000 soldiers do die in Cuba. Unlike the Philippines and elsewhere, there is a large loss of life. But look at this, right? Only around 380 die in combat. What else do they die from? Disease. So if you go into a different climate, a different country, and you're not used to the germs in that country, all right, you can easily get sick. That's why when you go across seas, it's important to take your shots to get your body prepared for the kind of germs you might encounter there. All right. So what happens is these soldiers go down there and their bodies are not ready for the disease that they acquire there, and it's also, again, that nasty meat I was telling you about. They're getting disease from the meat. All right, so let's watch this little clip over who are the Rough Riders.
A century has passed since Washington wrote, "To be prepared for war is the most effectual means of promoting the peace."
In 1897, as Assistant Secretary of the Navy, Dyar finds a cause that can help him redeem his family's honor. In Cuba, the long-simmering insurgency against the Spanish colonial empire is coming to a head. Dyar clamors for military intervention there, arguing that it's America's duty to liberate its oppressed neighbors.
It was Theodore Roosevelt that was the first one to say, "We have a responsibility to go over and bring people freedom, our freedom, and mess in their affairs. And quite honestly, that's the trouble that we have now in the Middle East. That's the trouble that we have everywhere in the world, is that we were saying, we're so great, we're going to bring this to you. That was an invention of Theodore Roosevelt.
The loss of national order.
What Teddy needs is a persuasive cause for attacking Cuba, a weapons of mass destruction argument, and he's about to get one. Remember the Maine? Probably not. Most Americans don't. But that's the U.S. warship that exploded in Havana Harbor in February 1898, taking 254 American sailors to their watery graves. Like 9/11 a century later, the tragedy roused America into vengeful fury and gave Teddy the cause for war he so desperately sought, even though it wasn't clear who was to blame.
It created tremendous war fever in the country and outrage on the part of Dyar, who thought this hideous act against us was needed to be dealt with immediately.
Theodore Roosevelt simply quits being Assistant Secretary of Navy and says, I'm going to war.
Dyar uses every bit of his political influence to get a commission as Lieutenant Colonel in the 1st United States Volunteer Cavalry Regiment.
Come on, lads, forward! Guys, courage!
He assembled a combination, and only Teddy Roosevelt could have done this, a combination of Ivy League graduates and cowboys that he had met in the West. And of course, they were called the Rough Riders.
Okay, what we're going to do is stop right there. If you didn't get that last bit of information, it talked about the explosion of the Maine. All right, so what you're going to do now, if you haven't done this already, I want you to take more time to look at the primary source in the explosion of the Maine. What you should have in front of you, right? If you don't have it in front of you, go ahead and pull it out right now. All right, is the primary source document from the Maine. And it's an example of yellow journalism. All right, you're comparing and contrasting the yellow journalism by, I believe it's Hearst, and then there's an article from the New York Times. And I want you to see the differences between the two. Right, so that's what we're going to be looking at today as we examine what blew up the Maine. If you are done with that, you can work on your vocab. Your vocab will be due. It's a double grade. So when you get done with that vocab, that'll count for 2 grades for a week. So you've had a lot of time since I've been away. I know you have to get that stuff done, to work on that. We've had lots of classroom time. So please, if you are not done with that, get that done. As well as the jungle assignment. A lot of folks did not turn in the jungle assignment, so that's there as well. So there's lots of stuff we can work on. If you have any questions, just come and see me, and then tomorrow we'll pick back up on these slides.